Thank you and good evening. Welcome to the members of the commission and staff. I don't see any members of the public yet, but I welcome them when they sign on. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission. It's our regular meeting of September 8th. It's good to be back after nearly 2 months off. Mr. Nguyen, will you roll the tape?
For written communications, please send an email to planning.commission@cityofpaloalto.org. Spoken comments using a computer will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the commission, go to zoom.us/join. Meeting ID is 916-4155-9499. You will be asked to enter an email address and name. We request that you identify yourself by name, as this will be visible online and will be used to notify you that it is your turn to speak. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on Raise Hand. The moderator will activate and unmute your speakers in turn. When called, please limit your remarks to the time limit allotted. A timer will be shown on the computer to help keep track of your time. Spoken public comments using a smartphone will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the commission, download the Zoom application onto your phone from the Apple App Store or Google Play Store and enter the meeting ID 916-4155-9499. Please follow steps A through D. Spoken public comments using a regular phone, call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 916-4155-9499. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, hit *9 on your phone so we know that you wish to speak. You will be asked to provide your first and last name before addressing the board. You will be advised how long you have to speak. When called, please limit your remarks to the agenda item and the time limit allotted.
Mr. Nguyen, please conduct the roll call.
Chair Heckman.
Present.
Vice Chair Rupavar.
Present.
Commissioner Alchek.
Present.
Commissioner Chang.
Present.
Commissioner Lowing.
Present.
Commissioner Suma.
Present.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you.
We're now moving on to oral communications. This section is for the public to speak on items not on tonight's agenda. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. On the Zoom app, there is a raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you're dialing in from a phone, press *9. Mr. Nguyen, are there any public speakers for oral communication?
Chair Heckman, we do not have any speakers for oral communications.
We will then move to agenda changes, additions and deletions. Commissioners, I have one item here in our public comments packet that we received yesterday from staff. There was a letter regarding agenda item number 3. It was written by one of the neighbors of 985 Channing, one of the neighbors who had submitted during the process a letter of opposition to the application being made by that applicant. And the letter requested a continuance of item number 3 tonight. The basis given was that this neighbor was under the impression from discussions with staff that the item was being targeted for September 29th, our next Planning Commission meeting, that they got this notice that it would be on tonight's agenda very recently, not clear. I'm not looking at the letters. I can't remember if it was just before or during the Labor Day weekend, and that they had insufficient time to prepare. It's an important issue for them. Some or all of them have legal counsel. And so their request was that the item be continued. I have conferred with staff to verify that in terms of the impact on the applicant, there is no particular timeline or municipal deadline that they're up against that a continuance might harm them in that way. So I'd like to hear what the commissioners think about continuing item 3 to a date certain, our September 29th agenda. And if it's the will of the group, then I'd look forward to a motion to that effect. So if I can, Commissioner Suma.
Thank you very much. I would appreciate deferring it to the 29th. I think it seems better for everyone involved to have, including us, to have a little more time and hear the perspectives of neighbors once they've had time to consider it. I can make a motion, but I prefer to hear from my colleagues first.
Thank you. Commissioner Olchek.
So can you repeat the logic? Is there a situation where notice wasn't properly given? Is there does staff have a sense that maybe the individuals who are supposed to be notified weren't given the proper amount of time?
I can respond, Chair Heckman, if you would like.
Please.
There's no concern that the notice was improper or that there was not sufficient time in terms of what the code requires for notice to be given, but that there is a request for continuance, and it seems amenable to the parties and to the staff if the commission is wanting to continue it to the 29th.
Okay, so is that both the applicant and the?
That's my understanding from staff. We've reached out to the applicant and that they're okay with that, with moving it to the 29th. And again, I think the perspective of the commenter, the neighbor, is that they didn't feel that they had sufficient time to attend to what they wanted to prepare for the hearing.
And just so I know, what is the amount of time they were given?
I think I would have to see if it was a 10 or 14-day notice. We did notify them, via email that the hearing was set. But again, in previous communication, they had been expecting the 29th because that's what our calendar was set for. And so it was a change from the previous date that we had discussed.
Oh, okay, then I'm okay with it.
Commissioner Lowey.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. There's no timeline for anybody here, and having more time for neighbors to comment on projects that are going out next door to them, I think is a real positive, and we should do that for residents. So I'd be supportive.
Vice Chair Rpps.
I agree. I'd be supportive. I think, allowing for more time with the neighbors and also just gathering more information. We asked for a few more things in the previous evening would be helpful too.
Commissioner Chen.
I am also supportive, particularly because the neighbors were expecting a different date, the 29th. And so the change is, if they were counting on that for their legal counsel and research, it's important that we give it to them. Thank you.
We've heard from all the commissioners with Commissioner Templeton, sorry. Now we will have heard.
Thank you, Chair. When did the staff change the meeting date?
Your microphone's a little warbly, Commissioner Templeton, but I think your question was, when did staff become aware of the shift in the date forward?
Yes.
I would need to ask staff. I'm not sure when they changed the date. I don't have that information available.
All right. So that being the case, it's hard to tell who's in the right and let's err on the side of caution and be supportive to move this to next time.
I don't think anything wrong happened. I think it's just a request for more time.
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand why and if we had more insight, but it sounds like we don't, and that's okay.
And from my perspective, I won't always be in favor of a continuance requested by a project opponent. But under the circumstances here, where I can certainly understand no fault on staff, and in fact, I applaud staff. We encourage staff to bring things, to move things efficiently through their process and bring them to us. And I think that's what happened here. And maybe they even surprised themselves by being ready to go with this on September 8th rather than September 9th. So I applaud that. But under the circumstances, I can understand the neighbor's perspective, thinking that they had the luxury of more time than suddenly they do. And so I would, if somebody wants to make a motion, I would be supportive of a continuance to date certain of September 29th. Commissioners.
I can make a motion. Okay. I move that we move this item to a date. Item number 3, public hearing quasi judicial on 985 Channing Avenue to a date certain September 29th.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Oh, sorry, was that Commissioner Chang? Yes, thank you, Commissioner Chang. Any discussion on the motion?
No.
Seeing no hands, Mr. Nguyen, will you conduct a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Olczak, Commissioner Olczak,
Yay.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Chair Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowing,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rupavar,
Yes.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yeah.
Thank you. The motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Mr. Yang, is that action sufficient do we have any tail that we need to address to complete that?
No, that should take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm currently seeing only 2 attendees, and I'm not recognizing either name as the author of that request letter. So later on in our meeting, after item 2, when we get to what would be item 3, I'll re-announce the continuance in case they were planning to join later. With that, we can move on to, well, actually, I should ask, are there any other agenda changes, additions, or deletions that any of the commissioners want to bring up? Seeing none, let's move on to city official reports. Ms. Tanner.
Thank you, Chair Heckman. Good evening, commissioners. Good to be with you all again today. Just a few updates for you. Just when it comes to what's coming up at City Council this remainder of September, we have the NVCAP will be back to City Council on September 20th. And then we also have our objective standards, which the commission reviewed, which will be to council on September 27th, which is the following Monday. And that objective standards is intended to be a kind of a 2-part trip to council. So we'll go to council kind of first for general feedback, any questions, more of a study session, and then take it up as action. I believe it's either in October or early November, which feels kind of odd to say November, just 2 months away. And speaking of things that are continuing and time moving fast, we are still unfortunately in kind of a little spike in the pandemic, and that has caused us to shift some of our reopening plans that we had as a city. And so we still have our development center, which is across the street from City Hall, and that is open for appointments. And so folks can go online to the city's website and they can go to the Planning and Development Services page and make an appointment. They can also call to make an appointment, and that'd be for building permits, public works, fire, if there's needing to meet with a planner. And right now what we're doing is 1 appointment at a time. We may increase that if and when we feel that it's safe to do so, but so far it's been working very well. and I think provides an atmosphere where both our staff and of course our customers can feel comfortable knowing who's kind of going to be there and some expectations around capacity. We do look forward, hopefully, to getting this commission together in person at some time soon. I will say I'm not sure of the date. We do have a meeting scheduled this week for chairs and for staff liaisons to learn more about how in-person commission and council meetings will be run. And so hopefully I'll have an update after that of when we might expect to be together again in City Hall and kind of what the circumstances of that would be. So those are kind of the few updates that we have. And I'm trying to think if there was one other thing, but it is escaping me. So those are the updates that I have for you all right now, but of course, happy to answer any questions that you might have, at least to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner. Questions of staff? Very well, then let us move into our agenda with our study session tonight. It's agenda item number 2, review and discuss potential amendments to Municipal Code Title 10, which is the parking title, to allow virtual parking permits, paid parking, and other code cleanup. Mr. Baird, will you be presenting the staff report?
Yes, I will. I'll bring that right up right now if that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's great. And as Mr. Baird's getting that ready, I'll just kind of remind folks, I think he was with us early this year in March, presenting parking work plan and action plan. And so this is kind of following up on some of the items that were discussed then. Yes, if you can go to the next slide, I'll just kind of tee us up a little bit. And so the purpose for today's meeting is really to review municipal code updates that enable the city to implement automated license plate reader technology, virtual permits, and commercial parking pilots, which we talked a little bit about when we were together earlier this year, to share the projected timeline for implementing the ALPR, to get feedback from the PTC, and also to get feedback and public comment. And just as a reminder, I think if you can go to the next slide, Mr. Baird, the city, has a lot of energy and a lot of work and planning around how to manage our parking and how to best manage that for the city and for the residents and all the users of the city. You'll find some parts of this back in our comprehensive plan, which of course was adopted in March 2017, the parking work plan and the parking action plan, as well as through last year's budget adoption and this year's budget adoption. Council also made decisions that kind of began us on this path that is continuing to better manage our parking and modernize how we are managing our parking. And so that's really the context that Mr. Baird is coming to us for feedback and also again to get comments from the public. So I'm going to turn it over to him now and take it away, Nate.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, there's quite a bit in the transportation element. And also I've been working closely with the rest of the OOT team and also planning and many of the other folks in the city on the sustainability, the SGAP plans as well, because there are some parking items in there too. And the virtual permit that we're talking about and these muni code updates that we are presenting is in progress right now and we'll be bringing to council soon, really do help advance many of the programs that help us move the needle on those transportation programs related to parking that help us meet a variety of city goals in transportation. So I'll just give a quick update to begin and why these codes are really necessary right now. It's important to understand that we have 8 different parking programs. We got the commercial core programs, and then also all the RPP programs in various neighborhoods. And these have really been adopted over time and have kind of become kind of a little unwieldy for staff to manage. And even for our vendors to manage, just because there's so many different programs and different options for each of the programs. And that really came out of the fact that we did pretty extensive planning exercises for each of these programs to develop programs that were very specific to the conditions that our residents and stakeholders were experiencing from the impact of nearby businesses and services, but also that were documented in with real data and counts that were done out in the field. But what we're really needing to do now is transition to a system where we can continue to do that data monitoring and continue to think through and propose adjustments that can help meet the goals of each of these programs. So the idea isn't necessarily to standardize all the programs to the same, but really enable us to standardize some things that will help it make us easier to manage, but also to get regular data monitoring so that we can make sure we're meeting program goals as well. On the next slide, we're just kind of reviewing here what these changes will allow us to do. So really it's about, adopting virtual permit options for our residential permit holders to start. This enhances the speed for customers, and it also simplifies the administrative procedures for staff on the back end. We're also, as we talked about last time I was here, interested in adopting new commercial parking regulations. And so what we're doing is we're going to be establishing in the Muni Code a process by which we can adopt pilots or do a pilot on a particular block or zone or in an area where it could be really useful for our commercial folks. And we know that, as the economy eventually does come back up to speed, that, the parking demand that we've seen in downtown and the Calab area and the surrounding areas tends to pick back up with that economy coming back. We're also interested in just kind of consolidating to the extent that we can the Muni Code chapters on all the RPPs, that except for the no overnight parking program in Crescent Park, which is qualitatively different than the others. And what we'll do is we'll establish a process for these. We'll establish a process for districts and zones to be added or updated or removed in the PAMC, and then adjust some of those things in the administrative guidelines instead of having some of these things spelled out quite as explicitly as they are in the code. So right now the code does specify very specifically in some cases using a particular type of hard permit or physical decal, that sort of thing. And what we're wanting to do is just allow ourselves to be able to use virtual permits. Some of the other changes are really about just kind of future-proofing the code to kind of bringing it up to a modern standard and moving some of the key elements to the administrative guidelines, which make it a little bit easier for staff to be responsive to conditions on the ground and to update some of our language to the best practices, which makes it easier for us to enforce on specific behaviors that we may see in the future. That includes using the word active for loading and unloading, removing specific times in the curb sign regulations and referring instead to as designated by posted signage. That allows us to be a little bit more flexible as people request green zones in the commercial zones or other types of curb sign regulations so that we can manage that curb really well. And another small cleanup item is just defining and adding some language to address transportation network company violations for parking or standing for longer than they're supposed to. So all of that helps, all of these adjustments will help us just kind of manage our curb more efficiently and effectively. More importantly, though, it really does help us enhance our parking operations. And this is the key reason why council directed us in this direction to help us make sure all our programs are financially viable and sustained over time. So, the overall enhancement that we're doing is transitioning to virtual permits, replacing the hang tags in particular. A big first change that will have to happen is that we'll have to tie one license plate number to each permit. This reduces staff time needed to verify valid permits and also makes it easier for many folks to just update their information online and have their permit requests fulfilled immediately versus having to go through a transaction and then have it wait for 10 days to 14 days for it to arrive in the mail, which is the case currently. And the goal really is to implement this in a phased approach to kind of ease the transition for our customers as best we can. So we're basing it on our permit sales cycles, thinking about when we'll be adding the technology to the vehicles. So the vehicles, we've got just 2 enforcement vehicles and 2 devices that will be installed before the year is out. And the idea is to have those vehicles in action, testing before the end of this year, for deployment in January. So again, here's a kind of a more visual way of thinking about the timeline for the virtual permits, and to kind of show how we're easing into it. So the first adjustment we need to make again is to tie each permit just to one license plate. And then, you know, the physical permits will no longer be transferable, though we will keep the possibility for 2 guest hang tags, transferable guest hang tags available for each household through this next year. But the following year, we think that'll be enough time for us to develop virtual guest permit portal that works for everybody. And then this next section is just, you know, the framework that we'll be setting up in the Muni Code for commercial parking and commercial pilots that we are interested in looking at. And of course, those will need to come back. But the idea is setting up a framework where the city will have a process to add a new paid parking zone. You know, we'll set out what types of permits we would be interested in, potentially interested in, and then operating hours and rates for those permits, as well as target parking availability standards. This really helps ground our program and anything we develop in, you know, available standards. The code will also determine how the revenues will be used. They could be used for the cost of operations and equipment. And then this is an interesting topic in terms of, you know, if there is any surplus revenues in the future, you know, where might those be allocated? Beyond that, the idea is to codify the paid parking violations and responses, including, you know, what type of payment is involved, use of slugs, what sorts of penalties are there for tampering with the devices, and those sorts of changes. So that's kind of the quick overview. I really do invite your feedback and input on, you know, how we're thinking about transitioning to virtual permitting. Also feedback on, you know, ALPR enforcement and parking occupancy monitoring that we'll be doing. And if anyone has thoughts on the commercial pilot framework, I'm interested in hearing what you all have to say about that as well. And again, you know, your feedback will be incorporated into what we bring to council with final recommendations and red line edits.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baird. Commissioners, questions of staff before public comment? Vice Chair Rupavar.
I just had a few clarifying questions. I assume the engineering, like the tech, is already built. Is that accurate? Because we're gonna start rolling it out with employees on Jan 1.
So
the website and the engineering is already done.
So the LPR enforcement will be rolled out to the RPPs first, and we will be working to build virtual permitting for employees in the RPPs first. It's a smaller subset of folks who will help us kind of transition the technology on. The technology has not been installed yet, so there'll be a transition in terms of how the enforcement is done, but that won't necessarily be obvious to anybody in the public in terms of whether the enforcement vehicles are using the ALPR or not. So when our enforcement returns on October 1st, the devices will not have been installed yet. But they will be installed before the year is out, and we'll have some time to kind of test and make sure everything works and kinks out before that goes live enforcement in January.
Got it. And then is there going to be, I assume, I'm just trying to visualize, first of all, I think this is a great idea. I love it. But is there going to be, I assume there's going to be some sort of website like you see with other cities or HOAs where people can go on and renew their permits and pay any sort of citations. Like that's what we're envisioning. And I was wondering if that's all been like built out and incorporated in the city's website.
So we are in the process of building out those websites and portals. So some of our programs, a subset of our programs, you are able now to go to an online portal and do your renewal that way. The only ones that are not there yet are the larger the Downtown and Evergreen Park Mayfield. Resident permits are going to still be valid that were originally expiring last year, that were going to be expiring this past March, were extended to March 22. So March 22 is when Evergreen Park Mayfield and Downtown will get the online renewal portal. And then beyond that, on the way to the following summer, we'll bring the same service to the garages and lots. But we've already rolled it out to Old Palo Alto, Southgate, College Terrace, and Crescent Park. So those 4 already have their online portals, but they don't have virtual permits yet. So you'll get the online portal for your renewal and purchase first, and then you'll have, in the subsequent cycle, we will be transitioning to permits that are tied to individual license plates, but you still have some hard permits. And then the final phase of this rollout is the virtual permit itself, where folks will be able to just type it. Well, you'll do it all at once in terms of the transaction, entering your license plate, and then also getting confirmation that you're now in the system, and your permit is automatically valid at that point.
And I had another question. I noticed that the 2 transferable guest hashtags, is that a hard cap, or are people going to have the option of purchasing from their neighbor? Is there any sort of flexibility that we're building in? Like, what if some neighbors don't want it, but like one neighbor has 4 children? How have we thought about?
Yeah, so what we've been thinking about really is transitioning folks to the downtown allowances, which means that you are allowed 4 and then 2 guest permits. We're still thinking a little bit about how the guest permits might work, and we'll probably take in a little bit more input. But the guest permits, as we're currently thinking about them, is that you'll have an allowance for 2 guests, and then you'll be able to update which license plates are aligned with those 2 permits. So you'll actually be able to potentially get those 2 guest permits, and swap in a new license plate if someone new needs to use it, and swap it back if needed, in that sort of scenario. We haven't thought through more if someone needs beyond 4 and 2 for their use. But in that scenario, potentially we could look into that. It just kind of depends on how the program's working and how many people actually need that, and what the parking availability rates are there.
Okay, and then one final quick question, and it's fine if you don't know, but I was just curious about if you had a sense of what were the operational costs for this project, and what do we expect in terms of, the upside, both in, financially, revenue wise, but also like operational efficiencies, like what we're gonna gain in terms of like, saving time on with staff, et cetera. If you don't know, that's fine. I was just kind of curious if you had a ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, the bar, I don't have exact specifics. I know that we exercised in February when we amended the contract with Duncan to add the license plate recognition. That was a $150,000 capital cost that we expended, but we do expect to get savings on the enforcement side. We get a lot of savings on the enforcement side, and then also on the administrative processing side as well. And then also our own staff time will be relieved a little bit too. So we do see this as being an important way of making all our programs continue to serve how they're supposed to, how they've been designed to serve, but do it more cost effectively and save the city some money. In the past, some of our RPPs have required some subsidy from the general fund, and these actions do help us address that gap that we've had in the past.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful.
And important, let me say, help address some of the gap. It is really important to see our RPPs as a parking availability service. The goal of the RPPs are to preserve some open spaces for resident use, and that's the goal. But the pricing does play a role in that.
Commissioner Chang, followed by Commissioner Alchek.
Okay. Thanks so much for all of your work on this, Mr. Baird. I think I might have missed it at the beginning of Commissioner Rupravar's questions, but is the ALPR implementation also gonna be phased? Or is it gonna be everywhere? I think I heard you say that it was gonna be in the RPPs first, but is it, how is that working?
Yeah, so it's important to take us kind of a step back and think through how our programs were set up. So originally we had College Terrace, which is enforced by the police department. And then Crescent Park is also enforced by PD. And then our 2 commercial zones are enforced by the police department. The ALPR device that we've purchased are for our contract enforcement in the remaining RPP programs. So that's Southgate, Old Palo Alto, Downtown, and Evergreen Park, Mayfield. So those districts are where we'll have the ALPR enforcement rolled out first. It'll take some additional work to figure out how to kind of work with PD on potentially bringing it. Sorry, I lost my screen for a second. So it'll take us a minute to kind of coordinate how to continue that rollout. So they'll be rolled out first in those 4 districts that I told you. But we will be able to, we figured out that we will be able to use those devices to do monitoring throughout all of our districts. So allows parking vehicles now, we'll be able to send them into the commercial cores and into the other districts that don't have the enforcement. But they will be able to go into those districts to do occupancy counts for us so that we can understand whether the program is working effectively in certain areas or not.
Okay, that helps a lot. Can you explain a little bit more about the logic of the phasing of the different neighborhoods? Because having so many phases, I imagine, creates a communication challenge. And so I would think that you'd want to phase adjacent neighborhoods at the same time, but that's not necessarily what's shown in your Gantt chart. So I was hoping that maybe you could talk about that logic a little bit.
Yeah, and the phasing, we may make some adjustments to it over time, but right now we're being deferential to the current sales cycles so that the impact on residents is as little as possible. We know it's a kind of a big change for many of our residents. So we wanted to kind of take it in pieces. It also gives us staff, in OOT, we're a small team. And so we're managing a number of vendors at the same time as we move through this. So it sort of made sense to kind of keep our current sales cycles in play and move in sizable chunks along this process so that we can kind of learn as we're going and fix things as we go as well. Though I do think, we will be working through the MRG recommendations in the parking work plan and trying to think through, what sort of adjustments in terms of standardizing really could help us minimize our efforts over time. And I do think that eventually we might try to consolidate the schedule. But the big heavy lift right now is just getting this Municode updated and allowing us to do the work first. And then just acknowledging the fact that as we go through this work and this process, we have a lot of customers, stakeholders, constituents, and we'll be wanting to figure out how they're adjusting to the program and making sure that we're able to continue the service that we provide effectively.
A really quick question about just the definition of what a transportation network company is with respect to that piece of code modification that you had referred to in your slides.
Yeah, so amongst transportation planners like myself, that's our generic kind of government term for companies like Uber, Lyft, and those folks. So
Taxis as well?
Certainly taxis as well.
That helps. That's what I thought it was, but wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I think it's a way of lumping together in my mind taxi, any sort of taxi-like service.
Okay. And then a follow-up question regarding some of the code modifications. You had, I think one of the commercial parking bullets talks about codifying paid parking violations, including use of slugs, tampering with devices. So those items seem to imply that we would be installing devices or something that could accept slugs. And is that a decision that has already been made, or it's just that we want to introduce flexibility into our code?
So what we're really hoping is to introduce some flexibility. We haven't landed on any particular device or approach yet. What this does is really set up a way for us to move forward. And certainly you can always go forward with a pilot, but it helps to have this good framework in mind as we move forward with a pilot and, have a standardized process, but not necessarily a standardized program or specific type of pilot. What we're aiming to do is, do a little bit more outreach to make sure that we have some permit product types that our commercial businesses will appreciate and think will serve their customers well. And then go through an RFI process to see what's out there in terms of vendors and what sorts of vendors could come to the table and provide at low or no cost to the city some infrastructure that would help us do these things. And that may include some sort of device, or it may include some private company installing some device somewhere, but we're not set on anything one specific right now.
Okay, and then finally, I have two questions relating to the RPPs. One is, as I was looking at the Gantt chart that you provided, I noticed that there was a difference in number in terms of the maximum number of permits allowed per household, and further, a reduction to either 3 or 4, depending on the RPP. So I'm wondering, I'm not very familiar with all the individual RPPs. I'm wondering, what is it, A, what is it being reduced from? And then B, why to that specific number, and why is it different across the RPPs?
Yeah, so it's been different for historical reasons. So when each program was set up, they kind of, I think, did some figuring on what made most sense in terms of allowing each resident and the number of vehicles they counted in each of the different districts. I think what we'll need to do is kind of monitor how it goes before we get. I'm not super committed to any of these numbers in particular, I guess is what I want to say. That, all of the current programs have a very specific number. Downtown has the most currently. I think it's four resident permits and two guest permits. But those are some of the, but you can actually purchase there's a decal versus a hang tag right now. So the decal is really specific. It gets stuck to the back of a bumper and it's tied to a specific vehicle. But the hang tags have always been sort of transferable. And the way folks have been using them is to kind of float it around sometimes, or if you have parking in your driveway or in your garage, you may, put it in a different vehicle, different days. So there's a lot of different ways that people have been using it. And then each of the different neighborhoods may have different impacts, or even different blocks might have different impacts. So what we're trying to do is kind of get ourselves a step closer to having some of those numbers standardized, just for the ease of communicating to the public what their options are. And I think right now we're leaning toward just adopting the downtown standard as the one that's the most flexible, but we might not need to play with those numbers over time.
Okay, yeah, because I looked at it and I imagined that there might have been like an equity question or something about a change in terms of why does one neighborhood get more than the other?
And we certainly do get some of that feedback sometimes.
Okay, and then finally, sorry, I've had so many questions. There's a bullet in your changes to the municipal code regarding the RPPs that says requiring at least 60% of all households to purchase permits prior to posting any permit signs when a new district is established or a block is annexed. And I was wondering, is that a change to what the current RPP policies are? Or is that already in some of the RPPs?
I am not immediately familiar with the exact percentage that we require for people to vote in. So that's how it was previously done, but this would just adjust it to getting folks to kind of purchase them before we post the new signs. Posting the signs is the biggest capital expense involved in adding a new district. And so this just allows us to be financially sustainable as we move forward with new districts.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that the current process is just the vote from residents instead of the purchase.
Okay, so this is about financial sustainability rather than anything else. That's the motivation.
This one in particular, we want to make sure that we're not over committing ourselves with the new districts.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are asking questions of staff before public comment. Commissioner Alchek, followed by Commissioner Suma.
Hey, good evening. Okay, I want to ask a question about the guest permits. The current, can you be a little more specific about how the current process for guest permits differs from the one that's suggested on packet page 11?
So the current guest permit system, you go through the portal and you request a hang tag instead of a decal, and we make that available to you if you're able to prove they're a Palo Alto resident. So that's the only process. So some of our districts have a free first permit, and so in some cases we've allowed that to be that guest hang tag. Which sort of goes against the original the original intent of the guest permit hang tag as it's written up in our Muni code. But yeah, that's how you can request one now. And then there's a limit to how many you can purchase of those in each of the districts.
So if I understood you correctly, there's hang tag expense for, let's say, the residential parking permit areas, and that could be what, $50 or more per permit,
Currently 50 for a year.
and you can get in some areas 2, in some areas 4. And in which areas are we currently allowing 2 additional guest hang tags, one which is potentially free?
So in the districts that have employees allowed to park, we have a free, you can get one free permit. And that can be either a guest, or it can be either a hang tag or a decal. And maybe it's more important just to say it's a transferable hang tag so that you could use it or a guest can use it. It's the same price as the decal, but the decals are tied to a specific car, and the transferable hang tag is transferable. In downtown, for example, you can buy up to 4 decals and up to 2 transferable hang tags. And then in Evergreen Park Mayfield, for example, I think it's 3 and 2. You can buy 3 resident and then 2 hang tags.
Okay, so in the new system, we will continue issuing hang tags for guests. And
for a year.
Are there any residential parking permit areas where there aren't guest hang tags? Like I was always under the impression that I was always under the impression that you could use the permits that you were issued for yourself, for your guests, for vehicles that were visiting you or not, and that the only other option were these sort of scratcher tags that were limited in essence in scope. So this is a little new to me, the idea that you could have 6, 4. That's new information for me. So I'm trying to wrap my head around that process.
Yeah, the current process is a little it's hard, it's a little arcane because we have the 8 different programs and each one is set up a little bit different. But yes, we do have the decals, we have the transferable hang tags, we have the scratch offs. And in some cases you can buy, and so in downtown, for example, you can buy 50 up to 50 scratch offs for $5 each. And those are one-time use that you can give to someone. They scratch off the month and day that they're using it, and then it's used. What we're going to be replacing those with is with an online portal that allows you to, update your own resident license plate that you use or the guest license plate that you want to use. And what you'll be purchasing instead of the physical permit is kind of a virtual permit allowance for yourself or guests. And then each of those permits, if it's an annual permit, we'll have that tied to a single license plate at a time. If it's, guest permits that you need, and we'll look into whether folks need more than 2 at a time, and ways to facilitate that.
So there's a conceptual process involved where you could allocate a virtual permit with some sort of funds on it on a nightly, it would deduct in essence. It sounds like what you're sort of suggesting. You'd have some sort of, this would be to replace the scratchers.
Yeah, so I think,
Is that different? Is that a different replacement than so I see what that tool does. Is there a different tool for replacing the more flexible guest parking passes?
So you're asking if there will be a comparable virtual version of the scratch offs?
So it sounds like there is a comparable virtual. No, I think what I understood was, what I thought you said was that there would be some sort of funds that you could deposit, and then you would have something equivalent to the virtual scratch off. You would assign it when you needed it, and in theory, it would deduct from those funds the $5 a night or whatever it is. My question is we also currently have a system, so we have that in place now. We also have a system where you have, let's say, 2 permits and you have 2 guest permits, one which may be free. What would be the virtual version of that?
So again, that would be the virtual permit portal. So the idea is that,
And that wouldn't be, you could use that every night of the year and it wouldn't necessarily be a per night cost.
exactly.
Okay. And then for the let's say the online portal that allows you to assign, let's say you register, your car, your spouse's car, and your kid's car, whatever that is, and you kind of rotate. The online portal will allow you to essentially do that with your fixed permits, with your resident permits,
Yes.
and you could theoretically schedule that.
Yes.
Or would you have to do that? Okay. And then my one additional question would be,
Well, I don't know. What do you mean schedule? You still have to actively go into it.
is that something you'd have to do every evening?
If you're switching who's using it every evening, I suppose so.
Okay.
So if you had just 2 permits, but you had 3 vehicles and you were parking one of those vehicles off street differently every day, then yeah, you would only need the 2 resident permits, but you could update. Those permits belong to you, so you could update which license plate is going to be active as often as you needed to.
I get it. Look, I'm only asking questions because since we're sort of moving to this, what sounds like advanced technology, and it sounds great, I want to understand sort of its limits, and then so that's why I'm posing some of these questions. So like, for example, let's say you did have 2 permits associated with 3 cars. It sounds like you're having a vehicle that's running through the neighborhood. Maybe this isn't something that's going to be rolled out in version 1.0, but in theory, there would be a sort of more automated approach, which would say, we only saw the 1 car associated with on the street. And since this car is associated with a 3 permit household, you know, where it doesn't require necessarily a management by the residents, that would be an interesting sort of feature that could be incorporated into the software or whatever it is. That's just food for thought. So the next question I have specifically about the presentation on packet page 12 says consolidate and centralize RPP municipal code chapters with the exception of Crescent Park no overnight parking program. What is the rationale of consolidating our municipal code chapters with respect to the residential parking permit program, but not the overnight parking program?
It's just a qualitatively different program and how it works. So all the other RPPs allow 2 hours free parking for anybody. So there's a time monitoring component to the ALPR enforcement that you have to do. Whereas the Crescent Park no overnight parking program is, it's kind of clear cut whether you're allowed to be parking overnight or not within a certain time frame. So it's just described very differently, and the descriptions and how they're set up is just entirely different. So it merits just having a separate no overnight parking section in the current code. Now, were we to expand that overnight parking program or expand to another district, we would be making potential adjustments just to this particular section. But right now it is just Crescent Park that has this type of program.
Do you consider the Crescent Park program as like a profit opportunity?
None of these are profit opportunities. The RPPs are parking availability service. And right now the current fees are nominal and haven't in the past necessarily covered their cost. But moving forward with the Muni Code updates that we're talking about is how we get closer to better financial viability. We'll also be talking at a separate, we'll be bringing forward a separate item to the Finance Committee to think through the financial viability of the RPPs in particular, in terms of potentially being able to more routinely just use any parking revenues for any of the parking programs. But in the past, what has happened is when the RPPs have costed more than they've brought in, we've provided a general fund subsidy. And we're trying now in that separate item to get away from that. We're not really here to talk about that tonight, but we are thinking through that right now. But really, these are parking availability services. They're basically a resident service, the RPPs, and we're interested in making sure that they're viable over time and for the long haul.
Okay, those are my questions about the presentation. I have other comments that I'll hold for later. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
Commissioner Suma, questions of staff?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Baird. I just wanted a lot of my questions were asked, so I'll save my comments for the appropriate time. But I did want to ask a question. I think I heard you say that anybody in a district can purchase a guest tag. And, the reason I ask is because College Terrace, where I live, and I was on the parking permit committee many years ago, was I correct? And so that's the program I know the most about more intimately, but did I hear you say that just now?
Did I say what?
Did you say that anybody in a district could buy, in a district with an RPPP could buy a guest?
We do require folks to show their proof of residency in the district.
Okay, that's something maybe we can talk about offline, in
Okay.
particular a problem in College Terrace. And then I want to understand this also about guest tags. So say for instance, you have 3 vehicles and their licenses are associated with your 3 permits, and you have 2 guest tags. Those are all transferable. Eventually you want them to be all transferable. I know they won't be now. Is that correct?
So there is that flexibility. And I think, the idea really is that the resident ones are for residents, and what we ask you to show when you buy the resident ones is proof that you live there. So usually it's a lease or a utility bill in your name. And we need at least one person for those. We don't require that as much for the transferables. Or I'm sorry. Those also usually we also ask for your license plate and vehicle registration for the resident ones.
Right. And so currently we're still going to be able to, until we transition to virtual in our various districts and neighborhoods, we're still going to use the physical guest tags, correct?
Yes. So College Terrace will still be using those.
Okay. And then eventually we'll transition to all virtual. So on any given day, could you use scratchers to park more vehicles than just your permits associated with vehicles and your 2 guest tags?
Yes, you're
Okay.
allowed to buy up to some X amount of those per year on an
Yes.
annual basis. I think in downtown it's 50. I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is in College Terrace. How many?
I think
of those
it's
are allowed.
20 every quarter or something.
I think that makes sense. That sounds about right.
Okay. Okay. I think all my other questions were asked, so I'll wait to the comment period.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other commission comments? Mr. Alchek, Commissioner Alchek, your hand is still up, but I think that is from before. So I will now open the floor for public comments on this agenda item number 2. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. On the Zoom app, there is a raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you're dialing in from a phone, please press *9. Mr. Nguyen, we have public speakers for this item?
Yes, we do. Currently, we have one raised hand from Nielsen.
I have a question for staff and for the commission. When was this staff report posted up to the public on the city website?
Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Buchanan, continue with your comments.
The point is, I don't think any of us can make a coherent comment specifically because I usually watch this like a hawk. And during the holiday period, I missed this meeting altogether, and so did a handful of the activists that are expert on this issue for the last 10 years. So you're having a meeting that we could be commenting on and helping everyone have better understanding. So this is a complete void, I think, but I am one of the more active people, even among the resident leaders, and I am totally in the dark about this staff report. This has happened before, particularly around holiday weekends. We like to get 5 working days in advance. I don't think it's happened. Just a couple of quick comments. There is no enforcement at night, so I think that whole discussion was wasted. The only place that has night enforcement anywhere in the commercial cores and neighborhoods is a very narrow set of no overnight parking in Crescent Park generally. So that's a whole nother thing. In fact, enforcement in the commercial cores and neighborhoods more or less stops at 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So I don't think we're even getting close to worrying about night enforcement. So, second of all, I've had a chance to have some ongoing dialogue through the COVID scrum about what the Office Transportation wants to do. And I am impressed that there's a lot of ambition of concepts and theory and some hard programs to implement over the next few years. But in our dialogue with Nathan and Philip, we have yet to see a meaningful PERT chart, Gantt chart, project schedule, or budget. I don't think you're going to get a vote of confidence from the resident leaders until we see some real engineering and project management. And I would be arguing none of this should get seriously funded until the engineers, and we have really good engineers, maybe not enough of them in the Office of Transportation to weave all this scrum together. I think you're already sensing that there's a lot of moving parts there's a lot of proven technology, but I have yet to see, and this has been very much handicapped by COVID, that the staff has a grasp of where practicality and theory meet the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Carol.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to make just several comments. First, I'd like to underscore Mr. Buchanan's point about implementation and practice. As we know, we've seen a great delay in getting the new permitting system going that was contracted with, I believe it's Duncan Systems years ago. It still doesn't work very well. So I'd hate for us to go into this very complicated set of procedures without some careful vetting. I'd also like to underscore Mr. Buchanan's comment about lack of public visibility into these plans. When the Evergreen Park RPP was first proposed, the city held several in-person interactive sessions with city staff to make sure that the residents were informed. Here we're proposing a number of very significant changes that will impact the life of residents, and yet no one seems to be planning any kind of public outreach. If you happen to be one of the activists, as I am, then I'm privileged to sometimes have conversations on Zoom meetings with Mr. Baird. If you're just a run-of-the-mill average person, you have no clue. And all of a sudden, you're going to find yourself with a lot of changes that you have had no visibility about. So I would encourage open communication with residents before any of this happens. Second, I note that, or third maybe, I note that what's being proposed here are additional restrictions for residents, yet increased flexibility for commercial parking. And I don't quite understand why that is. Residents need a lot of flexibility. You can have construction crews, you might have parties, you might have out-of-town guests, and here we are trying to restrict residents such that even if you move one car in your driveway versus another on a given night, you have to log into a portal every single night, and heaven forbid you forget. This really adds a lot of complication to a resident's life. Finally, I'd like to comment on the notion of whether this should be, how this program should be financed. Currently, the only RPPs that have significant amounts of commercial parking permits sold are downtown and Evergreen Park. So our program, essentially, it appears, will be funded by incursion into the neighborhood at the insistence of the city by selling commercial permits. This does not seem really quite fair to us versus all the other RPPs in the city. And I don't see any basis for taxing one set of residents and not taxing the others. That just is kind of raw nerve for me, that we have to pay for ours and the others do not. They get a general subsidy, but we're required to sell commercial permits to pay for ours, when it's the city's policies about commercial parking that have created the demand. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Chair Heckman, that concludes public comments for this item.
All right, thank you to our members of the public who spoke tonight. I'm bringing it back to the commission now for our dialogue and feedback, which is on this study session item, what is being requested of us. And before we start with commissioners, let me just ask a couple of questions, really keen off the public comments we just heard. First of all, the staff report, if staff can tell us when that was publicly available and whether that is consistent with our normal timeframe for releasing staff reports before a Planning and Transportation Commission meeting.
Thank you, Chair Heckman. We released this report last Wednesday, which is a week before the commission hearing, which is the typical timeframe that we aim to publish our staff reports. And they're also posted on our website under the Planning and Transportation Commission.
The next question really is to help us and the public understand sort of the rollout of this process. Tonight, we don't have an ordinance in front of us. We're really talking at a conceptual level with staff, as I understand it, looking for feedback to help them build an ordinance. Can staff help us understand sort of the next steps? Is this going to come back to the PTC in the form of a draft ordinance? The public will have a chance to look at the nuts and bolts at that point, or does this go straight to council? How does this train move forward?
So the idea really was to go to council next with, the ordinance a bit more baked in terms of providing it, the ordinance itself and the edits, the specific edits in red line to council. But there are some key points that we really did want some feedback and input on. The guest permits are of particular interest to our residents, and making sure that those are dialed in correctly and that we describe how we want those to work correctly is what we want. The Muni code itself, we're really wanting a little bit more flexibility of the Muni code so that we can make it, serviceable to our residents. And so, I'm familiar with some of the comments. I think much of the finance and the commercial parking stuff is going to come separately to finance for review, and I'll make sure that Nielsen and Carol and our other advocates and Chris also, get advance notice of what those dates are. I had thought that they were very familiar with this coming up today, but really today's item really is about the Muni code so that we can have a more flexible system and just kind of achieve some of that sustainability that we need out of our programs.
So if I'm understanding your answer.
So right now, the idea really is to go to council so that we could start rolling out the virtual permits to employees by January. So any delays right now would push that back. We'll work with however we need to work, but my preference would be to bring it to council next so that we can advance many of the types of things that Nielsen suggests that we need in terms of better data and better monitoring of what's going on out there.
PTC, it is not anticipated that the PTC will see a draft revised ordinance. It'll go straight to council and there will be no PTC review. Is that the current plan?
That is my current plan. And if we need to push it back, we can potentially discuss that. But my plan right now is to bring this to council on September 27th is the date that we have right now.
When you do, you will have taken whatever feedback we give you and built a revised ordinance for them to review.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that clarification. All right, commissioners. So we have an opportunity to impact an ordinance that it doesn't sound like we will see. So we need to be, I think, as clear as we can in our direction to hopefully have that impact reflected in the ordinance that goes to council. Commissioner Lowing, please lead us off.
Thank you. The first thing that I was going to say is that, this license plate reader technology, I think we've been hearing about that on PTC for at least 2 years. And it's really a valuable technology and it's not being critical here. It's just sort of overdue. So I'm glad we're getting this far, notwithstanding how it's going to be implemented and the costs and so on, which are absolutely correct. But the next thing I was going to say is exactly what Chair Heckman just said. So I won't repeat every word you said, Chair Heckman, but this is very unusual because we usually review, this is what we used to call code cleanup in various issues over the last few years, and this is code cleanup in a different area. But we usually do it, down to the exact wording of the ordinance in terms of how that impacts. So I don't understand why we're doing that, particularly if we just heard that the public would like more comment. So one option would be to take it to the Finance Committee first and then bring it back to us, something along those lines to be considered. The second thing, I guess the third thing I was going to say is that the employee RPPs should not be driving the bus here. This is a residential parking permit program. So starting there seems a bit odd to me. And it's a critical issue for the neighbors in terms of quantity and pricing and basically having commercial parkers on their streets. So that doesn't seem entirely completely thought out. if you could do it, one of the questions I had was, is it possible to find room to accelerate this program once it gets financed and so on, because it would be helpful. So don't need to answer that, but it'd be nice to know that there are ways to look at the schedule to, get it moving a little bit quicker. And then I want to go back again to this, because you also asked for more feedback on this, on packet page 11, this whole guest pass thing that you have to re-enter to get virtual. If I understand that, and maybe I don't, but if my two vehicles have got passes and I go away and my guests come and fill up my driveway and I can't get back in my driveway, I guess I'm still authorized to park on the street in front of my house. So that's scenario A. But scenario B is that if I've given out 2 passes to 2 of my friends that were here Saturday, I have to get license plates number of the 2 that are coming over on Sunday and have those changed. So I have to do the process of getting the numbers. Maybe I've got that wrong, but it just seems like that's going to be a user interface objection every time it happens. So maybe you could address the specific there.
Yeah, the guest permit program, what we're attempting to do is replicate how the current system is set up, though I agree that if we need to modify that, we can certainly entertain how to modify it to make it more user friendly. The important part is that we do need to have the license plate entered into a system for the enforcement vehicles to be able to enforce using the devices. And so that's the really key part of it. The Municode update right now is just about allowing us to use the virtual permits. It's not necessarily making any changes to how our current guest program works. I'm certainly going to be asking additional questions and getting some more information on, changes to our guest permit program that our communities are interested in. And I'm certainly open to entertaining those changes. The Municode update right now is about getting us to being able to use the virtual permits at all. And it'll be a phased in approach. Part of the difficulty with these kinds of changes, I think, is that it is really hard to predict, how they'll be used and what way they'll be used, what sort of difficulties we'll run into. We know that the guest permits were designed in a certain way that they're not being used at all right now. The practical use of them is entirely different than how they were originally designed. What we're trying to accomplish with the Municode update is just to allow us to move forward with virtual permits. And we can certainly continue to have a planning process to update, how those actual guest permits work, be they virtual or not. Regarding your other questions, if it is the standard practice for code cleanup, I'll certainly take that back to my leadership. I do think we'll have it attached when it goes to the finance committee. And if I need to come back here one more time, then I'll talk to leadership about that, and potentially we could do that. And then in terms of having the employees, the employee parkers aren't necessarily driving the program, but they're a user group that's a little bit easily identifiable user group for us to kind of work with. And their permits are updated every 6 months or so. And so we're delaying bringing it to the residents because we do want to get the details right. And the Municode updates that we're presenting right now aren't necessarily about getting the actual program details right. It's about just it's really about giving us some flexibility to get those details right in the future. So right now we have a very static program. It's set up in a particular way that is very narrowly defined, and it's an unwieldy program. I have to go look at a cheat sheet when I'm talking to someone about their different permit options and make sure that I'm getting it right, because we have 8 different programs with all different kinds of details. And what we really do need to start moving to a system that's a bit more flexible. And what the Municode changes that we're putting together right now are about giving us that flexibility to make adjustments in each of the programs.
Yeah, Might not take up too much time on the same questions, but my original comment was, license plate readers are a good thing. Let's go. But you don't necessarily go 100% of the way there. And if it's better for users to say, hey, now that you pulled up and you parked outside, here's your pass, put it on the window, you won't get ticketed and I won't either. That's probably going to be easier than changing license plates numbers virtually. The other comment I'd make on going to council, one option is to go to them with a study session with the same kind of input based on our input. And then once you get that and other stuff you need to know, come back to us for the actual municipal code. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you so much. I like Commissioner Lowing's suggestion about a timing and a more robust process for public review and PTC's review here. And I agree with the idea that automatic license plate readers are a really great idea. There are consequences. One of the consequences is that people like Nielsen and Carol, who's members of the public who spoke, will no longer be able to count cars the way they were used to. And they have done a tremendous amount of work to assist the city over the last 10 years or so. That said, there's a tremendous benefit in gathering information which could be of use to the very same people and the public in general, as long as the city is willing to share it, which I'm sure the city is. And a specific question from Mr. Baird was, if you didn't change, I understand you want to change some of the language, for instance, about loading zones and whatnot to make it more clear. But if you didn't, if you're not changing any of the details of the RPPP, do you really need an ordinance to implement the program in a more automated fashion? Or is that kind of implementation improvement available to staff as long as council signs off on it financially?
So the Muni code right now is very specific about the types, the hard permits, the scratch offs, the decals. And so we really do need to make the adjustment as soon as we can to make virtual permits possible. Virtual permits will be possible as soon as January 1st. If we don't necessarily need to do that, the enforcement can continue to be as inefficient as it has been moving forward. But the idea really is to start making some progress on the rollout of virtual permitting as soon as we can, which will be January 1st. And with the smaller user group in our larger districts is just kind of all our user groups, we've got visitor user groups, we've got residents, we've got visitors, we've got employees. In the commercial districts, we've got residents and guests and the RPPs. I'm not particularly committed to any particular rollout. It just made sense to start somewhere. And so I'm open to input about where we should start instead of where we're starting. And that can be discussed with our team. But it really is a lot of moving parts in terms of our enforcement team, the 8 different districts, thinking through how eventually we work with PD and their enforcement crews as well.
I can appreciate that. And for instance, in College Terrace, you cannot buy a guest tag if you have not purchased a regular permit for a vehicle, which was one of the recommendations. And I didn't know you could in other programs. And that makes it very hard for people who choose or cannot use a car themselves to have, such as disabled people or bike users, to have the option of having a guest tag. And for many people, elderly or disabled people, that guest tag could become really important because it would be used by a caregiver. So that is an illustration of how the program differs in its, could be improved and differs from neighborhood to neighborhood. Commissioner Lowing touched on the ease of ease of usership. Currently, the ease of usership, particularly with regards to getting to using the guest tags, sounds much easier than having to collect every potential license plate of everyone's going to visit you and put it into the system. What hasn't been easy lately is frankly, since we in College Terrace, since we started using the online system, a lot of bumps, real difficulty, especially for people that maybe are less accustomed to using computers to do things like that online. Or, but I will say that that we are also we do banking online, we do all kinds of things online, and the online purchase for College Terrace residents has made it much less easy. So that's something to keep in mind maybe as we go forward. And there's also some really big policy changes as I see them here, requiring 60% of all households to purchase permits prior to posting any signs when a new district is established, creates kind of a chicken and the egg kind of befuddlement for me, because what if the 60% isn't achieved? Currently, it's a simple for districts and for block by block entry into the district system, a simple majority was required in the past. And having worked very hard, as I say, on the College Terrace program, one of the really important things that we needed to use to really inform people about the value of the program for everybody in a neighborhood, regardless of your particular need for on-street parking, was that a lot of your neighbors may not have off-street parking, and you're helping them. And similarly, there's no need to purchase a permit if you do not need one ever, but you are helping your neighborhood, you're helping keep traffic down, helping even the few times you may need extra on-street parking. So I see that as a big change. And I also I know how complicated this has been, and I understand the need to improve it. But my observation is that the guest tags are working better now than they would in the future, having to provide all those license plates. And also, I don't think, and two members of the public that spoke touched on the lack of outreach. And on packet page 15, regarding stakeholder engagement, I don't believe anybody in my neighborhood, our neighborhood association, or any of the past leaders on the RPPP issues were contacted with regards to this. So I think we want to make sure we move forward with a better, more sophisticated technology, but maintain the services for the residents in a lot of these areas. So, and I also, Commissioner Chang touched on this, but I don't understand why certain neighborhoods would have more total permits allowed than others. That doesn't make sense to me. I think the size of our households, as we experience more ADUs and JADUs being built, size of our household, regardless of whether it's for extended family, multi-generational family, or non-related people renting an ADU or JADU, I believe the size of our households are going to increase, and no on-site parking is associated with that. So there may be a greater need. So if the idea is to get more flexibility into the systems across the city, then maybe it isn't good to be so prescriptive with some of these numbers. I'll stop at that for right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Suma. So I have Commissioners Templeton, Chang, and Alcheck. And before Commissioner Templeton starts, let me just say that I didn't impose any kind of time limit, but but everyone will have as much time as they want to speak. And so feel free to break off your comments in chunks if that works better. Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. Is this microphone working better now? Great. Thank you, Mr. Baird, for presenting. It's always a pleasure to hear from the transportation team and to have the opportunity to weigh in on these things that affect people citywide, residents and employees and whatnot. So really appreciate you bringing this to us. Regarding the pilot with city employees, having developed software myself and rolled it out, I understand why you would want a trusted group of people who you can rely on to give you feedback. So I appreciate that. I would suggest potentially maybe having a pool of people that would that are residents that aren't employees who could volunteer, and maybe choosing through a lottery some subset of those folks who could also agree to do your beta testing and give you some honest feedback. That might be a way to address the concerns that were brought up earlier. I like that we're starting to get real with this program that we've been hearing about for probably since you started, Mr. Baird. And you know, it's exciting to see that we're getting to a point where you're outlining the details of how to roll it out. And I understand that this is it's a challenge, especially in government, local government, to bring out something new. There's a lot of input that you're going to be needing. So, you know, kudos to you for taking on such a challenging project. Residents here are pretty sophisticated, and they deserve and will demand a user-friendly process. So it's really good that you've started to hear some of that from the commissioners and from the public. But I think that's going to be your goal. And to that end, I also think it would be useful to have another round of community input before you rolled anything out. But furthermore, I think you should consider what kind of ticketing, and I mean trouble tickets, not parking tickets, what kind of ticketing system that you're going to use to collect feedback, because you're going to have a lot of it early on and going to need to be able to manage and track that. So I don't know if you want to use existing systems or something separate, but please include that in your rollout plan. I don't think a simple email address for the parking department will be sufficient. And then I think in the end, people will appreciate the efforts you're making towards automation, and staff will appreciate the increased efficiency. So this is a really good program to pursue, and we're giving you a lot of feedback tonight, but don't be discouraged. This is because we want it to be successful whenever you do roll it out. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chang?
So my comments are around understanding Mr. Baird's concerns that we can't do anything until we update the code to kind of take it out of the dark ages, but also very sensitive to the concern that we could be intentionally or unintentionally introducing actual changes to the way the RPP system is actually implemented that go beyond efficiency, right? Just that are like material changes. And so as I look at these bullets that you have on packet page 11 extending into 12 that are the buckets of code changes that you propose, my sense is, and I could be wrong, that some of them are fairly uncontroversial and that really are just kind of bringing our code up out of the dark ages. So for example, you know, adding language for the ride sharing companies, specifying that loading, unloading needs to be active, loading, unloading, removing specific times that are embedded, that are kind of like hard coded into our code to allow for flexibility. Those all make sense and I think are probably relatively uncontroversial and are not what our public commenters are reacting to, and also not necessarily what the commission is reacting to. So I'm wondering if there is a way for you to split the code changes into two groups. One that could really go to city council and help you expedite things so that you can actually do and implement what it is that we've all been wanting to see and are excited to see. And then then a different bucket that might be something that requires another round of community involvement, so that we can make sure that the needs are addressed and that we're not inadvertently introducing changes. So as I look at these bullets, that bucket under permits is a lot more controversial. Some of them that would be pretty substantial and maybe perhaps aren't even necessary in order to implement, say, an ALPR system. For example, that third bullet about requiring at least 60% of all households to purchase permits prior to posting any permit signs, that's not something that's needed in order to affect current RPP program management. It's all about the future. But then something that's maybe less controversial is just broadening, that fourth bullet point that you have there about amending the language for how permits are displayed to allow for any permit type, including virtual permits. It's not saying that we're gonna definitely have them. It's just allowing more flexibility. Something like that might be less controversial. So I just wanted to encourage you to think about what's a must do if we want to adhere to any sort of timeline versus something that could be more controversial and really requires more community buy-in. And then, kind of looking at the commercial parking framework section, again, those are relatively, it seems like, well, I would say that those are kind of, my feedback to you would be, those are in the middle in terms of how controversial they might be. Things like how we're going to allocate any surplus revenue. That's a pretty big community discussion, but things like codifying what happens if you violate, if there's a parking violation, that might be a little bit less controversial. So I would think about it perhaps that way in order so as not to introduce significant delays. Thank you.
Commissioner Elchak.
Yeah, okay. So I think moving in this direction makes sense. I think so sort of globally, when I think about the permit programs in the city of Palo Alto, you can't actually consider all of them together because they're different. And so you have to sort of look at each one and say, okay, what is the cost and what is the value? If there would have been a way to reduce costs for the last 18 months, because we haven't had people coming into our city occupying, the office, the office space, and reduced enforcement expenses, I think we would have, right? And so this is an expensive solution. I think in some places it is a blunt tool, if you will. And I think that I think there's one of the issues that maybe planning commissioners have and maybe residents have is we're sort of moving forward, making this more technologically advanced, which makes absolute sense to me, and making it more efficient. But there are other questions and concerns that people have about the process and how it is implemented. And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of opportunities for the community to help improve upon that, which is sort of a different topic. And I'm mentioning it tonight because it doesn't sound like we're going to see you soon. And, I've been here a while, coming up on 10 years. And I was there, I was in the room when, for example, Crescent Park's overnight parking permit program came to fruition. And when I say in the room, I mean literally in City Hall chambers. It was 5 p.m. There were 44 residents in the room, something like that. Former Mayor Greg Scharf and former city manager were sort of just polling residents on how to put this together. And now we're, I don't know, 6 years later, 7 years later. And, you had suggested that, there was this one moment where you said something about expansion of the area. And my first thought was, you've got how many residents in Crescent Park paying for something that isn't the whole rollout of that particular program met the needs of, 2 blocks and when those 2 blocks obtained their sort of permitting and signage, it created bleed over into other blocks, which then felt infringed upon. They had to go through a process. And in the end, there's this, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I've never seen someone park on this street between 2 and 5 a.m. that didn't own a home on this street or wasn't the guest of a homeowner on this street, and yet they're paying $100 a month for parking passes. I want to share a few more comments. Like, I always thought it was absurd that there theoretically could be a homeowner with 6 parking passes. And I also intrinsically don't love the idea that the city could tell a homeowner, this is how many cars you can own. So it's like two, I think if we're a city that's like trying to be a leader in encouraging reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and we talk about requiring all of our employers to do X, Y, and Z to reduce the impacts on the roads. It's ironic to me that you could have some wealthy individual with potentially 4 legitimate parking passes and then 2 free guests or 1 free guest and a third, and it's like, well, that's obscene. And why is this individual entitled to use the public right of way for the, storage of all 6 vehicles that they may have, or 4 vehicles and their 2 guests? That always seems problematic to me. And I'm, at the same time, I'm like, what right does the city have to tell us how many cars we can own? So I think that just the fact that some of our residential parking permit areas differ in terms of the implementation of how many parking passes they can get, there isn't a lot of transparency and rationale across the programs. And I think as we begin to codify and move forward and invest in reducing costs by implementing new technology, we should consider the opportunity to sort of review what is our objective, what's the mission statement of all of these programs. I'm not suggesting that the interests that are being met by the programs aren't significant. I'm just suggesting that there hasn't really been a lot of opportunities for the commission and maybe for the community to dig in and better understand the programs. And I don't blame staff for that. Staff had to like triage areas, and it was complicated, and people were very time sensitive. And so, but this seems like an opportunity. This discussion seems like an opportunity for staff to consider that. I would also suggest to you that, we hear a lot in the news about sort of voting right restrictions that are happening in places. And I would suggest to you that I thought it particularly odd, for example, that when I wanted to get my driver's license with the new federal restrictions, limitation, that my passport wasn't enough. If my passport was enough to fly, then why do I need anything else to get that limitation off? Point I'm making here is I think Commissioner Suma's remark about an individual who doesn't have a registered car not being able to get a permit is too complicated. If you're a resident, you've got a lease, you've got a driveway, you've got a rental, maybe it doesn't even have a driveway. I just think it shouldn't be a significant hurdle to obtain the permit. And I would suggest to you, like I think most progressives suggest to many of these voting right, legislation activists, demonstrate that there's a problem with people obtaining permits, quote unquote, illegally, and then we can raise the bar for how those permits, the permit requirements are. So for example, if you said, listen, in College Terrace, we got a problem, got all these randos getting permits and they don't live here. Okay, maybe we need to set the bar a little higher. But I'm acutely sensitive to this notion that, okay, it's not just a senior who doesn't have a registered vehicle. It could be someone who decides not to own a vehicle and they have a car share, or they have I mean, the caretaker is such a superb example because our city is so overwhelmingly in the sort of later years in life in terms of our census. So it's a great example. It probably hits home. So I always thought that the process for obtaining permits was a little arduous. I hope that putting it online will reduce those barriers. And then my last comment would be that I think that there should be some, I mean, we haven't grappled yet with like parking, and we have big parking questions about downtown. I really imagine that and this is really directed at, Director Tanner. I really, or Assistant Director Tanner, I really envision a world where the Planning and Transportation Commission would do an annual review of these strategies and host an opportunity for the community to sort of share input. The individual who spoke earlier, Nelson, I mean, and I was there. I feel like I was there on one of the first nights he organized a group in his home. And I always thought that it was unfortunate that we didn't invite those individuals who clearly are dedicated to this more so than anybody else to just share some of their thoughts with us. So if I left any, like I said, there's only 5 meetings left this year. I think one of my suggestions for this planning commission and for the planning department would be there should be a standing planning and transportation commission calendar review of the parking strategies every year until no one shows up. Because I think there's a lot of individuals who want to share input and they're not given a chance, and coming to a meeting and speaking in public comment is worthless, in my opinion. I've had too many school district public comment experiences in the last 18 months to realize that those are really not useful comment sharing opportunities. And so I'd really like to give that suggestion to all of you. That's all my comments are. I would support the bulk of the changes because I think we're going in the right direction. And I just would encourage the city to have a process where there were more frequent, regular reviews of sort of city ordinances, so that we didn't always have, I think the Planning Commission and the City Council, struggle to pass to change ordinances because we're so worried that they'll never have an opportunity to reflect upon them again. And here's a clear opportunity. If you created an annual opportunity where the Planning Commission can make recommendations to City Council on what changes could be implemented, that would be very helpful. That's all I have to say.
So I want to start my comments actually with a point on the process. When you are crafting a law, whether it's a standalone law or an ordinance or a section of a code or amending any of those, I think it's been easily shown that the more dialogue there can be on the specific language, the better product you're going to get. And so it's disappointing to me that we may not have an opportunity to participate in the dialogue for this amended ordinance. I think that there's risk when, we don't have a draft ordinance tonight, it's the 8th. And if one's going to be presented to the council for their meeting on the 27th, that means it has to be at the council probably a week before that, the 20th. So there's 12 days to put all that language, take our feedback and create language. And that's not very long. And the risk that I see is when you daylight that modified ordinance for the first time on about the 20th, you're going to get comments from the public. We have a group of interested citizens.
I'm losing.
Did Chair Heckman freeze for others?
Yes.
Yes.
Chair, I'm not sure if you can hear us. You may try to turn your video off. That might.
It looks like it's off and he's still not with us.
So can someone text him maybe?
And you're gonna have.
I can text him. I'll text him.
Yeah. And Vin, can you turn his video off because you're the host? Maybe that will help him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So let me try it with the camera, and if I don't know what happened, I just lost connectivity. So I don't know where I lost the thread.
We heard, I think, about up to where you were talking about just the challenge overall of not having the ordinance in front of us today and kind of some of the time to turn the comments tonight into the ordinance or incorporate the ordinance.
Yeah, so I think it's short, which puts a burden on staff, and I have great confidence in staff to take all the feedback we're offering and try to put that in language. But I think it's a better process if we look at that language first, and if we can hear, if we, the Planning and Transportation Commission, can hear public comments on that language, because then I think we can give staff more focused direction on the language, which will allow staff to bring a more polished product to the council where maybe a lot more bugs have been removed. So, and that's usually what happens here. I understand, Mr. Baird, that we're trying to get this in place by January 1st. And so if it needs to go this way, I understand it. But if there's an opportunity for, I think it's beneficial to the process if we can comment on the language and if the public can comment with us on the language, because that makes, I think, the council's job easier. All right. Now I just want to talk about parking programs generally. And I'm not a huge fan of them. I appreciate their utility, but I look at them as an accommodation from the city, as an extra service, not as an essential service. And so when I think about providing extra service that is not does not uniformly benefit the entirety of the community, I want the benefited community to take the laboring oar, and I want the impact on my city staff to be minimized. And so that's why I am attracted to going virtual here, because my impression is the steps that we are taking are going to reduce staff time. And if in doing that, and that will reduce cost of the program to the city. And if in doing that, it requires the neighbors, the residents who are actually directly benefiting from the project to spend a little more time. Maybe it's, registering cars over, going online for a minute or two and saying what cars you want, what permits to apply to tomorrow. To me, that's a reasonable price of admission to have the city make this accommodation for your neighborhood. So I'm supportive of those things, even though that might be an unpopular position. And then the last point I want to make, and incidentally, I like the direction of the bullets that are in the staff report, and I'm generally supportive of those. But I do want to talk just for a minute about the reality of human error as we shift into this virtual permitting process. And I have a great example. My wife is a teacher at SF State, and they have just transitioned this semester from hang tags to virtual permits. And so just before the semester started, she went online and registered her car and paid for parking, which is a great aggravation to her that she has to pay for parking at the place she works, but she did it. But that aggravation was nothing compared to what she felt yesterday when she came back after spending the day teaching students and found a $73 parking ticket on her car. Trying to get to the bottom of it this morning, she figured out that in registering her car, she had transposed a couple of the digits. And, this is somebody who edits writing pretty regularly, but it can happen to anybody. And so what I learned from this is these kinds of mistakes are going to happen. And I don't think this is part of the ordinance, but I think as we roll out these virtual permits, we might want to think about some period as we roll them out in a neighborhood of call it a grace period, where for the first month, perhaps instead of giving a ticket, it's a warning. And that will allow people to work out the bugs if they've done what happened in our household and they, typed in the wrong license plate number. And also it's just a way to ease people into the process. So that's really a suggestion. It wasn't, I pick up the flavor of that in the staff report. So that would be my suggestion. Otherwise, I think we're headed on the right path. All right, other commissioner comments? I am not seeing any hands. If I don't, okay, Commissioner Suma. So again, our request tonight was to provide feedback. So we won't need a motion to conclude this once all the commissioners feel that they have passed on the thoughts that they wanted to staff. Commissioner Suma.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention that I think Commissioner Chang put into very clear language what was the intention really of my comments, that there's really two buckets. And I appreciate that and agree with her. And also, I think Commissioner Alczyk's idea of like an annual PTC parking roundup is a superb idea. And I really appreciate it. And I think most of my specific comments I've made. I just wanted to thank those two commissioners particularly.
All right, any other commissioners with comments? I'm not seeing any other hands. Staff, let me ask you if, yeah, Mr. Baird, you're muted. Still.
I just wanted to say that your comments have been really invaluable tonight, and I really think it will have a good impact on the ordinance that we're working on and the muni code update. We are going to finance next, but right now that's the current plan. I will talk to leadership about potentially adjusting the plans. I have some ideas myself too, what that could entail, but I'll air those out with my leadership to figure out how we move forward. So I do think there's a lot of good options and good thoughts tonight. I really appreciate that. I do want to say too that, my job really is to listen to all of you and to our residents. So I really do listen very closely to our resident input as well. I get the sense that, there's been a lot of impatience with, the implementation process and the impacts of COVID the last year. And, we've had a lot of planning work for the last 4 years regarding parking. So, I think we're going to figure this out, and I think folks will be satisfied with what we put forward. So thank you all for your input and feedback. And, I'm certainly interested in coming and talking to you all more often as well. So I will also look into that as well. I think certainly once a year is more than reasonable. And I think, more often that would probably make sense too, as we get some of the details worked out.
Thank you again, Mr. Baird, for the staff report and the answers to our many, many questions. All right, next on our agenda would be action item number 3, a public hearing quasi-judicial matter regarding 1985 Channing Avenue. For those couple of members of the public who were in attendance, if you weren't in attendance at the beginning of our meeting, we voted to continue that item to a date certain of September 29th. But we will now move to approval of minutes, and tonight we have 2 sets of minutes from our prior meetings to approve, June 30th and July 4th. I have submitted revisions for both of those. And so I'd like a motion to approve the minutes for those 2 meetings.
I think it was July 14th, not 4th.
I'm sorry, July 14th. Thank you. Vice Chair Rupert.
Can we break them up because Commissioner Alchuk and I weren't here for the 30th?
We have a motion for June 30th.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second. Second.
Mr. Lewin, will you conduct a roll call vote?
Commissioner Alchuk,
Aye, aye, aye.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Chair Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowing,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rupovar,
I'm gonna abstain. I wasn't here for June 30th.
Wasn't that also the case with Commissioner Alchuk?
Yeah, but I watched the meeting.
Oh,
I mean, after the fact. And didn't have any problems with the minutes, which I didn't review as closely as maybe some of you did, but I watched the meeting, so I think the record reflects what probably was stated during the meeting.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries 6-0 with 1 commissioner abstaining.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for July 14th minutes, please? As revised.
So moved.
Second, someone?
I'll second.
Thank you, Vice Chair Rupert. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Alchuk,
Aye,
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Chair Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowing,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rupovar,
Yes.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
The motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee items. Commissioners, any of you have committee items to bring forward? Commissioner Lowing.
I would just mention that the Housing Element Working Group has been working very hard this summer. And I think it's been quite productive. And I say that addressing it to this commission, because I think that, some of the processes that are in place, when it gets to us, it will have already been a very productive dress rehearsal. And the folks are really engaged in it. And continue to work it in some off smaller groups as well. So I've been really pleased with the way it's going. I think it's productive. It will be productive for us and for the council.
Thank you. Other commissioners with committee items? Moving then to commissioner questions, comments, announcements, or future agenda items. Commissioner Suma.
I was going to mention that the NV cap is going back to council. And I'm trying to find the date. I think in September.
20th, I think.
20th, yeah. Okay, that's what I thought it was, but I was trying to verify that for anyone that's interested.
And I am the PTC liaison for that meeting with Commissioner Chang as my backup. All right. Ms. Tanner, do we know yet, other than the deferred item from tonight, whether we have anything else set for our September 29th meeting?
At this time, we don't have any other items that are planned for that evening. And so we could, look into some other topics to discuss if we wanted to that evening. But right now, there's not any staff reports. I will check with the Office of Transportation to make sure they don't have anything planned, but they haven't reached out about any forthcoming items.
So at our last meeting before the break, we talked about the possibility of a retreat. And ultimately, my conclusion was that there wasn't a really strong desire to do something of that magnitude. But that doesn't mean that there might not be a topic or more that the commission wants to be able to talk about. Commissioner Alchek, in our last item, brought up an example of an annual review of our parking requirements and how they're working. And so September 29th would be an opportunity, I think, with a single item on the agenda, to have a study session of our own choosing rather than something that's been brought to us for discussion. And so I'm wondering if any of the commissioners have something that they'd want to the group to chew on September 29th. And if not, I would encourage the commissioners to think about that issue on a longer term basis. I know I put you all on the spot here, but if something occurs to you, that it would be good to have a commission discussion on from our own initiative, then let me know. And I see your hand, Commissioner Suma, so I'll call you in a minute. But we can, we'll look for an opening on a future agenda to schedule that. Commissioner Suma?
Would that be a discussion that we had amongst ourselves without a staff report? Because are we asking staff to do an extra staff report?
Given the shortness between now and the 29th, unless it was something pretty simple, I was envisioning it would be a discussion that might lead to some staff looking into something, but that we wouldn't be asking them to prep us in advance, again, unless it was pretty simple.
I might offer Commissioner or Chair Heckman another idea, whether it's for the 29th or to the chair's point, could be in the future, or maybe you don't have anything in your mind right now. Sometimes we've had guest speakers come in to talk on different topics. So in particular, if you know of a speaker who has a topic that may be of interest to the commission, we can certainly see if they're available. And if not, put it in the queue for a future commission date too.
I have a question maybe for the chair and also Assistant Director Tanner. Can we use the Planning Commission when we don't when we don't have other things on our workload to do, to schedule a time to hear from resident experts, like the people that came tonight concerned about Rpps, or is that somehow does that not fall into the category of what you just mentioned?
I don't know that unless there's something Mr. Yang would tell me, I don't know that there would be anything that would prevent that from like a procedural standpoint. I think we would just want to be thoughtful about what they're coming to talk about and kind of the setup. We do typically, if we have a guest speaker, need to notice or like when we publish the agenda, would include like their bio or just, who the person is. We'd also probably want to make sure that they didn't have any type of conflict, something coming before the commission for discretionary approval. Well, there's just some things we want to check, but generally speaking, I think it would be fine.
Commissioner, Mr. Yang.
I don't have any specific concerns about that, subject to, what Assistant Director Tanner mentioned, just about providing enough notice in advance and being able to notice what they're going to speak on. Yeah.
So Commissioner Suma, that may have answered your question, but I understood your question a little differently. I thought you were really asking, can we take an issue like our parking program and just have kind of a public forum where we take comments and say, how's it going? We don't necessarily have a speaker. We just have a dialogue with the public. It's not tethered to an agenda item or an ordinance or anything. Is that what you had in mind?
Kind of what I had in mind, and I wasn't sure it was available to us legally, to be honest.
Oh, okay. I think, yeah, I was understanding it differently. I think part of what we would have to look more closely at are like the procedures that we have. I think part of what can be a little bit stiff about our setup, and this is common for many boards and commissions, is that it is not a dialogue, except among the commissioners and those whom they choose to call upon. Now, certainly it's discretion of the chair if commissioners do call upon members of the public or applicants to engage in more questions and answers. And so certainly it can take on the form of a dialogue. What I think I'd have to look at closer with Albert would be kind of how that dialogue would be shaped, and how people would just be notified of the interaction. That said, so I'm just thinking on the fly here, it may be a little too soon for the 29th. I mean, bodies sometimes do host workshops, and we just have to set it up in a way that ensures that the Brown Act's not being violated. And so, which we can do, we just have to be mindful and kind of be thoughtful about how to do that.
Yeah, so my question was, is there a way we can find, we can invite the public to opine, like if we look at Mr. Buchanan and how much time he spent over 10 years, he's a real expert on downtown, on RPPs in general and downtown. And it's a way to give the public a chance to speak and other people to hear them, including commissioners, without giving staff more work. That's kind of what I'm looking for, whether that's legal and how we would do it.
Yeah, I would want to talk with Albert a little bit about it and see what we would need to do to set it up. Because I don't want to say no, but I don't know that it's like just yeah,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's simple. So
yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's something that we could figure out and get sorted. Probably just need to have a short conversation though to sort out the details.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chang.
I apologize for turning off my video. I'm having connectivity issues, so I will turn it off again if I run into that problem again. And again, I don't know if this is in the realm of possibility necessarily, but in terms of topics that I'm interested in, I think about what motivated me initially to become involved in the Planning and Transportation Commission. And it was actually more around the transportation side. So I would actually be really interested in hearing more about where, I'm not quite sure how to structure this, but I'm interested, what I always hear about are where the accidents are and kind of.
Commissioner Chang, I think you froze. Can you hear us, Commissioner Chang?
So she's turned off. Oh, no. Okay, she's turned off her camera. Commissioner Chang, we heard you say where the accidents are.
Great, I don't know so where I'm interested in is in areas where there's a lot of accidents or congestion. And so I would love to hear more information about our roadways. And that's a topic that I would be interested in. It's a very broad topic. I am also sensitive to wanting to make sure we're not creating a bunch of extra work for our staff. So I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I did want to raise it as a topic of interest for me.
All right. So I think that we don't have a clear, doable concept for September 29th. staff will kind of look at what flexibility we have to have, and I use the term dialogue. That may have not been the best word to use, but to have some kind of forum for the public on a topic, whether it's parking or transportation. And so perhaps we can hear what our options are on the 29th, and then continue this discussion and look for a date in the future with a light calendar where we can do something. Commissioner Lowing.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, no need to respond, but the other side of the question is, sort of defining the problem here, which is that with all the issues going on in the city, we don't have some things coming to our agendas. Tonight was light. We've been off for 2 months. Next week is only got one thing that we pushed from tonight. So the obvious question is there anything that can be accelerated so we can get a hold of it, get our teeth into it, and get stuff done and shoot it on to council. So that's just for, not necessarily for debate, but a question relative to what staff could do to bring us more meaty stuff sooner. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, there's not anything that could be accelerated. A lot of our projects are long range, and so they kind of simmer in the background before they come to the commission and onto council. At this time, a lot of our projects, we do have some staff that are unfortunately out and not able to fill, but we did have, this is the announcement I forgot. This is what I forgot earlier. We just hired and just started this week, last week, maybe, a new principal planner in our long range planning team. So we're very excited to have him on board. His name is Sheldon Ossing. He was with us as a consultant for a number of years at M Group and now is on staff. And so we are super excited. So maybe I'll give Sheldon the job of accelerating some things to bring them to PTC since he doesn't have a full workload yet. So that will hopefully help us get some more things out the door.
That is a great addition to the city staff. He is a very talented planner. So I'm really happy to hear that. Commissioner Olczak.
Yeah, I'll just say, I feel like I've been to many planning commissions in many cities, and I was reflecting on this while I was listening to all of you speak, which is that, and this has been a common thread on our commission, and which is to just highlight that there are really very few instances, I can't think of any other than this commission, where a commission expresses an interest in further engagement and hosting further dialogue, which I think is either a testament to just how motivated the commissioners are on this commission, or it's a reflection of, the work schedule maybe being light. I don't know, but it's interesting. I mean, this is a period of introspection for my people right now this week, and I just listening to this conversation, I was thinking to myself, like, why is it a common theme that we are trying to host more conversations about more topics and circling that sort of that bullseye, if you will. So interesting, because I've literally never heard it at any other commission. Not that I go to every commission every week, but I've been to a number. So just wanted to put that out there. Hopefully something will come of it.
I think that's an excellent last word for this meeting. So with Commissioner Olczak's comments, I will declare us adjourned. Thank you.